Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. Before we start the show, I wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press. Kobold Press are the makers of fine 5th edition D&D products, such as the Tome of Beasts, such as the Campaign Guide to Midgard, such as the Kobold Guides to, and they go beyond. They do Pathfinder, they do a little 13th Age. They are really, truly awesome, and now you can get the Zobek Gazetteer for 5th edition. It's a city book that works in Midgard or anywhere, and it's written by James J. Hake, friend of the show, an amazing game designer who worked with me on Dragon Heist, the upcoming hardcover from Wizards of the Coast. Zobek Gazetteer features NPCs from Troll Bouncers to the Mouse King and locations like the Arcane Collegium and Kobold Ghetto. Hooks and lore for the gangs, guilds, and gods of the city are included, plus the School of Clockwork Magic, backgrounds and feats for Gearforged and humans, plus magic items unique to the setting. You can drop this in anywhere. It is a super awesome supplement by an amazing designer. Go check it out at the Kobold Press store at koboldpress.com. That's koboldpress.com to pick up your copy of the Zobek Gazetteer. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking with a person who needs very little introduction, one Matthew Mercer. He is, of course, the Dungeon Master for Critical Role, but he is also a game designer. We know Matt as a voice actor, as a streaming DM, and many of us know his game design work. It's best-selling on the DMs Guild, and he also created, of course, his Tal'Dorei campaign setting with Green Ronin. So, check it out. We dive deep into Matt's game design. I figured you can hear him talk a lot of places about Critical Role and voice acting and things like that, like our own DM's Deep Dive podcast, which you should also check out if you want to get voice acting tips from Matt and how to bring that to the table. But this is mainly about game design and how he does his Dungeon Master prep and runs the game and things like that. So check it out. Here is my interview with Matthew Mercer. I am here with Matthew Mercer. Matt, for people who have no idea, and they should definitely know at this point, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
So I'm Matthew Mercer. I'm a voice actor, but primarily in tabletop gaming, as well as being a lifelong fan and hobbyist in the area. I am the Dungeon Master for Critical Role, which is a group of voice actors that have been playing D&D on stream for the past 3.5 years, as well as the Dungeon Master for Force Grey, which is an official D&D recurring seasonal group of celebrities that come together and play D&D and other random elements on the internet. So that's where I'm from.
Excellent. Well, it's awesome to have you here. There's a lot we can talk about, but I wanted to sort of explore a side that I don't think you get to talk about as much in interviews, which is really your game design work, because you do a lot of game design too, in addition to voice acting and all this other stuff that you've been doing. Critical Role, which is amazing, and Force Grey, which is amazing. You've also put out some really cool products on the Dungeon Masters Guild. You put them out before that, sort of through Geek and Sundry. So talk to me a little bit about your game design chops before you started with Critical Role.
Ironically, it was kind of unexpected and kind of subtly occurring. Like anybody who runs a role-playing game, every GM's process, the more you play, the more there's some things with the rule set you don't like, or there's some things that you and the players creatively want to add to it, so you begin to homebrew. Whether you realize it or not, whenever you customize or change a rule to fit the way you like playing, that's a subtle form of game design. You're taking something that exists and you're altering the system for the betterment of your experience. And so when I was a teenager, I always daydreamed like, man, designing games would be great, but it was never something that I, thought about seeking or doing. So it was never an intentional thing. But as the years went on and I played more systems and had different types of players at the table, I began to just subtly customize things to our specifications and interests. So I guess for years I've been unintentionally doing small bits of design, and it wasn't until we began to stream online, that people began to ask for, like, hey, I saw this thing you customized, what's that rule about? Or like, you did this random feat or this ability, what was your reasoning? And so the more I began to answer these questions, the more I began to want to just say, here, I'll throw it up there. So if you want to, on the internet, and if you want to try it out, go for it. And so it began, really, a lot of it began with me after I did a show called D and Diesel, where I got to run a game for Vin Diesel for a short time, which was still one of the weirdest and most surreal experiences of my life. But it was part of a promotional thing for his movie The Last Witch Hunter, and so I customized a witch hunter class for him in this. It was very simple, a couple of abilities, but all of a sudden there was this huge number of people in the community that said, "Hey, I want to play as a witch hunter." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll just throw together a class." I was still comparably new to fifth edition. I wasn't very aware of all the bounding issues with the system, and how things worked really balanced within the system. So I kind of threw out a design out there, and then the immediate feedback was like, "I love it," or "This is really broken." And I was like, "Oh, then let me change this and we'll try this." And so it was kind of an unintentional process of designing and then fine tuning and then community feedback and then altering. And then before I knew it, I had a whole class that I had kind of fine tuned and put up on DM's Guild called the Blood Hunter. And I really enjoyed the process of designing it. And so that was kind of where the bug bit me. It happened naturally, weirdly.
That's amazing. It's incredible because it's sort of like the fifth edition playtest. You know what I mean? You created this thing, put it out into the world, and then the world gave you feedback and you incorporated it and went from there. I remember talking about the first version on my podcast and being like, oh, I don't know. I want to play it. It seems great, but like, I'm not sure about this and this. And seeing then the changes come from that and seeing the implementation. And by the time the DMs Guild launched, I remember it was like that and your fighter archetype for the gunslinger were two of the first things on the DMs Guild. And it was like, wow, these are already really good because they've been play tested and commented on. And now you've done a lot. And I think for me, player options, particularly classes, are some of the hardest things to design, right?
Yeah, kind of started with the rough side of things unintentionally.
Well, it's true because if you're designing a monster, right, that doesn't like it needs to have a pretty decent challenge rating figured out, and you need to have sort of your abilities formatted correctly and all, it's not that that's easy, but comparatively, like you're not going to ruin a play experience from a balance, and I'm putting balance in quotes there, perspective, right? Whereas like, oh, if somebody all of a sudden is this new class and they outclass everybody else in the party, it changes the play experience in a big bad way.
Very much so. That's kind of been part of my learning process in this thing too. And it's been kind of a fun opportunity for me to essentially show my process of learning how to design publicly, because people have been able to see all these stages of things that, had hopefully some decent ideas at the beginning, but were not necessarily functional comparison to other elements. And then the tweaks, I've been very open about why I made changes and, wanting for feedback. And over the years been developing other elements for DM's Guild and then for the Teldora campaign guide, and then still updating things throughout our current game. I'm still learning, and that's kind of what's been exciting for me is I'm by no means a paragon of game design. This is still a newer process to me, and I'm really proud and excited about how far I've come. But there's still plenty for me to learn, and I get to have the joy of having everyone else watch me learn, and hopefully they learn through this process as well.
Yeah, one of the greatest things to read is your threads in the DMs Guild on your products with your communication with the community and everything, and seeing how thoughtful your responses are to some feedback that could be more constructively worded, shall we say.
Yeah, I guess we can put that.
I think it's fascinating to see your give and take with the community, and then to see like, this season on Critical Role, people playing the Blood Hunter class and people using all of the things you've created is really incredible. So let's talk a little bit about Tal'Dorei then. The campaign guide, was that something you wanted to do? Were you approached by Green Ronin? How did that come about?
I was approached by it. Most everything we've done with Critical Role has been reactionary. We're so caught up with just the chaos of what the hell is happening? How is this happening? Please let's not mess this up. That we haven't really up until recently been able to get ahead of the curve a little bit and try and really do things proactively. So the campaign guide, this is a world that I built based off of a one shot that just expanded. It wasn't initially designed or intended to be a setting that other people would play in. But as we played for years, I had all these notes that were, madman scrawlings and various, Word documents on my computer and notebook drawings and stuff. So when we began to stream it, people began to exhibit interest in this world that we had built. And I began to get more deep into the actual world building aspect of it. Green Ronin came to us and said, hey, we'd love to possibly publish a campaign guide. And my first instinct was, oh no, I've never done that before. How does that happen? How much do I have to have done? I don't think I can do it. Sure, let's try it out. And so it was me going back through all my old notes and having to rewrite everything in a way that both could be read by anybody who didn't understand the world and hopefully feel immersed in it, and as well as leaving it open enough with like plot hooks and enough of a narrative flair that it would be just an enjoyable read was kind of my intent with it. And it was a very new experience for me. Green Ronin was very helpful in that learning process. So yeah, that was definitely a I don't know what's happening, but I hope it's okay. And then James Haig was a huge boon to me on that. I had read a lot of his writing, and he had a very similar narrative style to writing that type of content to mine, and he was very quick to kind of adapt his writing style to my voice, if you will. And immediately, not only was he just an excitable, good person, but he knew the game well, knew the world that we had been playing in, and was just an absolute pleasure to work with. So I owe a lot to him as well, helping me out with that.
Yeah, he is. He's incredible. He's been on the show before, and I've gotten to work with him as well. Just a good person too, like a good heart, and an amazing dude.
I love it. It's a good combination. It's not easy to find always, so it was really really pleasant that it all kind of is in one package with him.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. He's young enough that he hasn't been jaded yet by the gaming community in the world.
We must protect James. Everyone, protect him, please.
Yeah, it's our real life D&D quest
Yes, exactly.
is to make sure he. But yeah, it is a beautiful book, and it's amazing the way that it all came together, and that's why it's really interesting to hear that like it was Green Ronin reaching out to you as opposed to you being like, oh, I want to make this, because it there is so much passion put into it, but it is also really written like a campaign guide, right? It's not written like a novel and here's the story that you must tell in this world. You can go anywhere and tell any story you want in that world. It's great. When you were sitting down and putting it together, were there parts of the world that were totally new to you when you were creating it?
Many parts. I'd say about 50% of it was new to the campaign guide. Yeah, about half the continent were things that I'd fleshed out with our campaign and places they had gone and areas that I alluded to and had kind of outlined. But there was a whole half of the continent, both to the north and the south, that they had never ventured to. And the story had never brought them there. And I had vague ideas of what was in those areas. And so when this campaign guide kind of apparated as a plan that was going to happen, a lot of it was just me designing and developing those very vague ideas that we never really got around to in the game, and then in some spaces letting James bring his own flavor to it. I wasn't so stringent to think like this is mine, it can only be my ideas. I very much wanted it to be a collaborative experience. So there were areas of the continent and locations and certain elements of the world building that I basically just told James, like, here, have this section, go for it, and I'll look it over and make sure that it fits. And he'd give me his pass. I'd do notes and find ways that if anything didn't seem to match with the kind of the preset things, I'd give feedback, but very little was needed because he is great. So yeah, it was a lot of creating, a lot of retooling and re-explaining things in a way that other people could read as opposed to my crazy chicken scratch notes. And yeah, it was a really stressful but very informing experience. I'm very thankful for it. And I don't know, for me, games, I'm not strongly there to tell a story. I do that enough just with my friends at the table. I wanted it to be an invitation for the people to create in that world. I feel that some settings that I've read in the past seem to be very much like, here is how things are. You can put yourself in here and try and make something. I wanted this to be very much an invitation to do anything you wanted to in the space. So I was very much a big point for me and James when we were going through it, was to make it feel like it's an invitation into the world, and then essentially do what you like.
And that it feels very much like, not necessarily flavor wise, but in that sense, in the invitation of bring whatever you want and do whatever you want, come play in our sandbox, right? It felt like the Eberron campaign guides that are written with lots of hooks and mysteries that don't necessarily have an answer, right? That it's like, hey, here is the thing, it's up to you to put that out there. And I thought that was great. Were you then thinking about that as you were dropping in adventure hooks and things like that into your world?
Very much so. I wanted it to, with each location, as I would write it up, I would have ideas for plot threads of, like, if I were to run my party through here, what kind of story ideas would I have? And there were a few that'd be like, oh man, should I write this down or should I save that for my own campaign? And then I'd be like, nah, I'll put it in. So yeah, it was basically just as we're developing the areas, when I'd have ideas, I'd write them down, and then same with James. When he was doing passes and reading through, he'd be like, "Oh, I have an idea for this area." I'd be like, "Oh, that's cool. Put that in as a plot hook." I don't know. It was one of the more purely creative experiences I've ever had, because it was just us. Aside from editing and truncating elements that are necessary for a printed piece, it was basically just me giving full carte blanche, going, "Hey, build us a book, whatever it is," and which is also really scary and it's a lot of pressure, but it was a really fulfilling experience.
And then, sort of along those lines of storytelling, you also were a story consultant on the latest Wizards of the Coast
Yes.
book that, well, actually, it's not even out yet, right? Dragon Heist.
No, it comes out in September, I think. Yeah.
So what was that experience like? How did that work with, obviously it's instead of you and James Hake, it's you and Chris Perkins kind of talking about story
Yeah.
together, right?
That was really trippy. Yeah, I'd gone and visited them a few times, both like to work on Force Gray narrative elements and just generally like talking with the team, but I'd never been there as a consultant for any of their actual product, really. And so that was a surreal experience to go in with the team and then essentially pitch me the story that they're working on, and being, what would you want to do? And it was really crazy. It was like 3 solid days. I was up in Seattle, and we essentially locked ourselves in boardrooms, having to run from room to room because certain ones were booked at different times. So it was kind of like this weird nomadic meeting that just continued in different spaces throughout the days. But it was Perkins and Merles and Adam, and like all just coming in and writing out the structure of the various the Mass Lords and the Open Lord and the all the different factions of Waterdeep, and the story that they've been wanting to tell. And so it was a really cool process of them telling me what they had developed, and then me kind of picking apart some of the problems with it, and then us problem solving, and then developing from there. I think originally the pitch was a mystery that was based around Manchun as the main villain, and it was like a eventual reveal, and they had like all the art for him, and they wanted to do this whole promotional push, and so they gave me this whole pitch, and I was like, okay, that's great, but what happens if like the internet or somebody spoils that he's the villain? Or what happens if you can't use, if you want to make it a big promotional push for him as part of it, doesn't that spoil the whole mystery that it's based around? And they were like, oh yeah. So we sat down and cracked into it, and we began to talk about the idea of modular villains and a modular story where the main structure of it could be consistent, but you would have, based on the different seasons, different factions that you could choose that would change and alter some of the encounters and some of the things that could happen in the story. That way you can repeatedly play the same adventure essentially and have it be entirely different with the same party and group, and have different groups that have finished the adventure and come back and having completely different experiences with completely different villains. We had created an entirely new faction of the Castlanders. It was basically just an entire period of focusing on this modular system, on the villains and what their reasons and intents were, what their goals were and how they would fit in and out of the story. And it was just like this super intense think tank for 3 days. And by the end of it, we had this really amazing, I still have pictures of it, this whiteboard that was just full on, you talk conspiracy theorist notes written everywhere with arrows pointing here. And at the end of it all, I was like, I felt super proud. And then as I was flying home, I was like, they're probably not going to use any of this. It's way too complicated, and I think they may. Oh no! And I didn't hear anything for a while. I like for almost a year, I didn't hear anything, and I was afraid that like they're like, okay, cool, Matt, thanks for the feedback, and kind of just pushed me off, and brought somebody else in to actually work on the book, and I was very happy to know that they actually used all of it, and then some other really talented people picked up from there and fleshed out the entire world.
Yes, yeah. So one of those people obviously was James Hake, which is pretty cool. And I was fortunate enough to also be one of those other people.
Yeah.
And it was super great. Essentially, when we came in, we were handed like 100 pages of like, hey, this is what we did in those 3 days. Here's our notes. They've been organized. They've been, and we took that and ran with it. But it was like having the world's greatest outline and toy box full of like, hey, here are some interesting characters. Work them in wherever you think they are most appropriate and that sort of thing. So it was it was a dream come true. And in a weird way, right, we were collaborating even though we weren't face to face working on stuff.
That's true, actually.
It was great to sort of hear that process of how it all comes together and how this stuff happens. Was Charlie Sanders there with you as well when you were there, or did he come in after?
I think he came in after. Yeah, shortly thereafter. But yeah, it was a very surreal experience, and I'm super excited for people to check out the adventure. I remember years ago wanting really badly for there to be some sort of a return to an urban fantasy environment. And to the point where even after consulting on this, I would be on panels or like a round table, and people would be like, "I'm really hoping that D&D does like an urban kind of heist adventure expansion." And I'm sitting there just kind of biting my tongue, going, "Yeah, that'd be great." We're exceeding into my NDA.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a once you're on the inside, you're like, "This is amazing, I'm here," and then you come out and you're like, I can't tell anybody about this.
Yep.
There's no one I can talk to.
For like a year and a half.
Well, it's super fantastic, and it's going to be amazing to finally let people play in this story, because I think the modular nature of it is probably its most genius aspect, and the various villains that are there are really cool. So I think you have made a really, really great thing.
Thank you. I hope so.
So, sort of along the lines of game design, I just want to delve into your sort of GM and DM history a little bit. How long have you been running games? I'm sure you've answered this question a zillion times.
I've been running the games for close to 21 or 22 years, around there.
Wow.
Yeah, so
that's a lot of your life.
Yeah, I'd say so. Decent time.
Did you start with D&D, or had you started with another system? Like, what was sort of your go-to?
My initial system was D&D. It was second edition, AD&D. It was my freshman year of high school, and I'd been invited to a game with a bunch of seniors who were part of my anime video game club. And I was like, oh my god, I get to hang out with these guys and we're going to play a game. And I made this character that I was really into named Emeritus Trent. He was a militant wizard, which was like the worst kit you could take for a wizard in second edition, but I didn't care. And it was not a great experience. The first like campaign I ever played, we played like 4 or 5 sessions, and it was really frustrating. And the DM, while he was a nice guy, was very much an example of a bad, I don't say a bad, but like a very intense dungeon master who had his own character in the party and then always did what he could to make his character the best character over the other party members. And the story seemed improvised in not a positive way, and like a very kind of just nothing was unique. He would randomly roll for what barbarians would jump out of a bush and attack you over and over again. So it basically pushed me into dungeon mastering because I was so unhappy with the experience but could see the potential, that I quit that game, got a dungeon master guide, and then began to run a game for my cousin and my 2 friends. And that was kind of where it started. And as you know, back then there were no video guides to how to do this. There weren't even like really elaborate, the internet had just started, like AOL chat rooms had just begun. There was nothing out there. So you're learning in a vacuum from hearsay at your local comic book and game store from other people who have been doing this for a long time, or just making things up as you go. So I'm sure I was a terrible dungeon master back then. But as the years went on, you learned once internet forums became a thing, there was now a community there that could compare notes and give feedback and ideas. And I tried many systems since then. In high school, I played a lot of Rifts, which is its own chaos. So I played some Exalted. I played Gamma World. I played Call of Cthulhu. I played a bunch of those RPGs kind of in the late 90s, mid 2000s that kind of came our way. But D&D was always kind of the recurring staple. I've always been a fantasy kind of swords and sorcery guy, so I couldn't escape it.
Yeah, me too. That's always been the staple, and obviously it's sort of the biggest, so it's a great one to bring people around the table together to play.
Don't go anywhere. There's more Tabletop Babble coming up.
I'm Lisa Chen, and I host Behold Her, a monthly podcast that shines a spotlight on women in the world of tabletop games. There are so many women to behold in this amazing hobby, and our experiences as female gamers are as diverse as we are as individuals. Through one-on-one interviews, audio essays, and panel discussions, all centered around a monthly theme, the guests on Behold Her share their unique stories as players, game masters, designers, artists, organizers, and so much more. Their words are inspiring, uplifting, and informative. Check out Behold Her Podcast wherever podcasts are found, or visit beholdherpodcast.com.
All right, back to the show.
When you're GMing for Critical Role, there's I've heard that your prep is legendary, that you do a lot of prep work for your stuff. Is that correct? Because now I'm seeing a face.
I don't know. I have nobody's prep to compare it to, so I don't know if it is or not.
But is it the same prep that you do before there were cameras in front of you? Like, is it sort of the same amount of prep time, you think?
I'd say it's grown just because there's an expectation of the world building. Previously when we'd play once every 6 to 8 weeks, and the players weren't as invested in all the details and minutia of the world, you had a little wiggle room, and it was much simpler bullet points. And if I missed or there was an inconsistency with an NPC, or I made up a name of a location, even if it was named something earlier, the players wouldn't remember and largely wouldn't care because they were in the moment, and it was fine. As the show's gotten a bigger following and people have begun to run their own games in this world, and there's Wikipedia or whole wikis that are keeping track of all these details. There's a whole group of people called Crit Roll Stats that keep very meticulous notes of everything that we do and all aspects of the world. I became very conscious of the idea that I had to maintain a level of internal consistency for my players, but also for the community. So my prep has definitely grown, just because I want to not let those people down,
Sure. Yeah, I would do the same exact thing, I think.
And it's not a bad thing. It just means I have to put a little more time aside for it, and it makes me a little more prepared for each session.
Mm-hmm.
And in the long run, if I get to release more campaign guides, I'll have a lot of the work already done for me if it comes around to that. So that helps. But I would say the prep has definitely grown over the years, just for my own interest of being consistent.
Yeah, definitely. Do you use crit roll stats when you do design work? Like, are you ever like, well, let me reach in here and see sort of what the average damage of this character is, because I'm designing a class for that, or that sort of thing?
I have not so much crit roll stats for that. I have looked at like community, damage reports, and I'm not too worried about that per se. There's some folks that are out there, they rank their classes by damage per round, and what kind of multi-class min-maxing can kill a adult green dragon in one round of combat. I'm like, all right, that's fine. But I do use crit roll stats sometimes to remember features of NPCs that might have occurred a year or two ago in the world, and I'm like, wait, what accent did I have for them, or what race were they? What exactly was their name? So it's actually been a really useful tool that the community has been kind of maintaining these notes for me, so I can go back and just do a Google search and find out what normally I'd have to comb through pages and pages of old notes to try and confirm. So it has been helpful. It really has been.
Yeah, definitely. Having a community that sort of takes care of your wiki for you and that sort of
Hmm.
thing, it must be. I never thought about that, but that's definitely an added benefit of going back and having all of that. That's really
It
cool.
is. I would never have expected it. And from a design standpoint, for designing classes and archetypes and stuff like that, the community has just been immensely helpful, both for just the feedback they give me directly for my designs, but also being able to look at reviews and breakdowns of existing classes and vanilla classes in the system and see what people liked and didn't like about them, trying to find facets that are missing. That's the main thing too, because there's already a wide breadth of classes in the basic game, and the archetypes that are out there. It's not about just designing something that is different. So you want to find something that feels like it can fill a missing piece in that spectrum. That way it fits and isn't just like a retooling of a barbarian or a slightly different color or flavor of wizard. You want it to feel unique in that space. And that to me is a very difficult thing, and it's a hard process. I mean, for instance, the way of the Cobalt Soul Monk that I released in the Tal'Dorei guide, the whole idea and intent behind that was to make a monk that wasn't just about brutalizing things with fists and attacks, but had abilities that were based around the gathering and the use of knowledge. And my first designs in that were my first times ever designing a monk, and I've learned a lot since then. Even in the published book, I've put out an errata, and there's been updates as it goes along. So it's a process of still learning and finding information from the internet and from the community, and then fine tuning my knowledge of what makes a good design. So thank you everyone in the community for being so helpful with feedback, both to me and to just the game in general.
It's interesting because I didn't really start designing content, I think, until fifth edition, either for public
Right,
consumption,
right.
right? And it really does become a whole different beast. Everything from the way you present your information to what your information actually
Yeah.
is very, very different. Do you have a favorite element of the game that you like to design? Like, are you passionate about classes, or are you passionate about monsters, or that sort of thing?
Oh man, monsters and classes sit at a pretty even keel. I really enjoyed creating monsters and creatures in the game because I don't know, it's fun to think of challenges that reach beyond the standard monster manual and what's out there. They're getting better at it with like the release of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. They have some of the high level creatures have more dynamic ways of shifting the battle and controlling this. Not just like I do damage or I do more damage in this area. They're having more unique ways of changing the battlefield and making a challenge that isn't just who does the most damage quicker. So for me, designing encounters that can play in that space have always been a lot of fun. But I think for me, honestly, designing play of like my brain melts sometimes. Designing player options, I think, is a lot of fun because it has a longer standing impact on how people enjoy the game. The idea that somebody could pick up an archetype or a class that you've designed and then base their entire adventuring experience around something you created, and then can come back and be like, thank you, this brought me something that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to enjoy, is a really fulfilling experience.
Definitely. On that sort of high level note, and being with your player character options for a while, do you typically play a longer campaign? Obviously, the first Critical Role story went on into the very high levels of play. Is that sort of your typical MO for when you play like a more than a one shot?
Uh, Generally not that high level, actually. Part of the reason we went to such high levels in our first campaign was because none of us had really been there. Most games that I'd run through most of my life, and I'm sure many DMs out there can commiserate, usually either just faded away because the players got difficult to schedule with, and life happened, and some people moved away, and we didn't have all the great tools like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds we have now to play, at range. So a lot of campaigns would get to like the mid levels and then peter out. Or like I ran a full Expedition 3.5 Expedition to Castle Ravenloft game, which ended about level 14, 15-ish. So that was as high level as I'd completed a campaign at. And so for the first campaign of Critical Role, we hit a point in the campaign where really narratively the main story had completed. And we all decided, do we want to continue or do we want to start a new game? And all the players like, no, let's take this to 20. And I'd seeded some ideas and some on-running things with Vecna that would allow for high-level play. So we continued to play, and it was a very fulfilling experience. But now that we've had that, we'll have to see if we want to go there again. If we reach a point in the current campaign that we feel like this is a satisfactory ending to the story, all the current player storylines and their intent and drive seems to have come to a cathartic end, and there's no reason to try and just fight so we can kill and get more experience, then we might just end it there. But as is the nature of the game, we can't define or prepare for those things this early. We'll just see where the game takes us and make decisions based on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. You never know where stories are going to end up, when Archon is going to come back. There's all kinds of things that could happen. So
Indeed.
You do such a great job in those later episodes of the first story arc of Critical Role, because high level play is hard to run. And you have a lot of players. Like, you have a lot of players to be running a high level game for.
It's been its own challenge, definitely.
Yeah. And your players do, I think, a good job of being focused and being in the moment and that sort of thing. So I think that obviously helps, that nobody is texting.
That does help, yeah.
But yeah, you have so many players, when you're managing that many people and that many stories and characters and that sort of stuff. What is your process like after the show? Do you make notes after? Do you go back and watch the episode? Like, how is your your post-show process?
It's definitely a challenge. My post-show process, especially with the number of players we have, is to take notes. I'll take notes through the session, and then after the session, I'll take notes. And then occasionally I'll go back and watch key moments. Like, if there'll be certain social encounters or certain moments of a combat that I think will, actions, choices, and certain things will have repercussions or impact on things that happen in whatever I'm preparing or down the line. So I'll make sure to take notes of that, about those sequences and keep them in my little folder. So yeah, I definitely am very proactive with making sure that I'm reminding myself of those moments and how they impact what's coming up. Yeah, it's a large group. My golden number of players is about 5. I think 4 to 5 is like the perfect group number, because we didn't plan it to be a show. We didn't cast it. It was just whoever was invited to that first game that I made for Liam 5 years ago, and I didn't have the heart to tell anyone to leave once we started streaming, because we're all invested. So I was like, all right, this is just, I'm going to have to take the torch and make it work somehow. And it's challenging. It means, just from the way the action economy is built, that you have to customize a lot of creatures and a lot of abilities to still be threatening, but not take more time per se. It can be easy to say, well, I have more players, that means it has to have more hit points. And say, yeah, to a certain extent, but then it just becomes a slogging slugfest, and that's not fun. Because a game goes longer doesn't mean it's always better. So I tend to err more on the side of increasing the damage on attacks. So even though a creature doesn't get as many rounds to act in the battle, it still is a threat, and the few attacks that it does have feel really dangerous. Or customizing and adding abilities that can, attack multiple creatures at a time. Like if it's a melee type creature, maybe it has an attack that can hit everything that's adjacent to it, or in an arc, or have certain abilities that can, shoot in a cone effect, or have ranged abilities that can cause a small radial effect. So I do a lot of customization on creatures like that, to where it doesn't lengthen the gameplay per se. It doesn't increase the number of rounds that we play per combat exponentially, but it does also give the creatures and the combatants the capability of still being a threat to more players, in a scenario where I might have 6, 7, or if we have a guest, sometimes 8 players at the table.
Sure. I always do the same thing. Whenever I start with a new group, I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep it at 4. It's going to be fine. And then invariably it ends up at 7, because I don't want to say no, right? Like I want to share the game with everybody. I want everybody to play. So one of the best things about watching Critical Role is you all are a home gaming group that has come together. And so it is fascinating to watch, like, the process of, like, wow, look how good they all are at playing this game. Anybody can be this good. This is amazing. You know what I mean? It's really inspiring to sort of see how it comes together and to see a bunch of friends having a blast around the table, which is
Thank
really
you.
how it comes off every week. So
Thank you. Well, and the opposite side, you also get to watch all the wonderful times that we mess up the rules and
sure.
and forget the rule, and then realize, oh, it's okay if they forget it too. It still worked out fine,
Mhm.
and we learn from there. Because that's the thing is you don't have to be a master of the game. In fact, I'd recommend you not be to play.
Yeah.
As a dungeon master, of those that are watching this who DM, if you can't remember a rule, you can certainly stop the game and go and look it up if your players are really intent on the logistics of it, or you could make a call in the moment and continue with the narrative. And if it goes against the rules, that's fine. In most cases, the players won't mind.
Yeah.
And if it's an inconsistency with an ability or feature the players use often, maybe then you can be a little more particular so they can understand it better. But ultimately, as long as you're having a fun time at the table, it's not going to matter. And
Yeah.
we have the benefit of thousands and thousands of people telling me when I mess something up in the game. Most of it very very heartfelt and earnest, just wanting to let me
Uh-huh.
know. A very small handful that are maybe not as nice, but that's okay too. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot from the system from reading it, and I've learned a lot from people that have informed me. And ultimately, at the end of it, I'm thankful for the feedback, and I'll still mess it up.
It says a lot about you as a person that you called that a benefit and not a bug in the system that 1,000 people are calling you out on everything you do.
That's fine. I
So
can take it. I can take it.
Well, I think that it's amazing, and I really can't wait to see what comes next from the design brain of Matthew
Oh
Mercer.
man, I'm excited to show you guys. I got some fun stuff coming up.
Ah, yes. So you've got some plans, right? That's all I need to know. Obviously, we can't
Oh yeah.
say anything
Oh
else,
yeah.
but
I can't say anything else, but I got some plans, yo.
yes, that is awesome to hear. And one other thing I want to leave you with is I think you're obviously you're a super modest dude. I think what you were doing is amazing for the community. And I'm wondering, a little bit before we started recording, we talked about this. Like, I have seen not only has actual play, in particular Critical Role, grown the audience for this hobby. There are new people coming to D&D all the time, and we all know about the Wizards of the Coast sales numbers and everything like that. And Critical Role has played a big part in that, but it also, the quality of player that is coming through is really great. They're good people who are open and accepting, and they want to have a good time telling a story. And it's also, it seems to me that there are, statistically looking at the statistics and just anecdotally, there are more women coming to the table. There are more people of color, and all of them are coming because they've seen different actual play shows, Critical Role among them. So I'm wondering, do you feel the impact of that? That like you're having a big part and in changing the community for the better. And I'm not really sure, but that there's a question there. But I'm just wondering, like, do you feel that? Do you see that change happening as well?
I see the change happening, and if if we have anything positive to do with that, then I'm over the moon. It's overwhelming. We've had the opportunity to go to events and conventions and interface with a lot of community members from around the world, and the unexpected and deep impact that somehow just me and my friends around a table playing a game has had on people who've struggled with depression, struggled with suicide, struggled with identity, struggled with all these really major psychological facets of being alive and a human being that we all try and walk through and be comfortable with. It's incredible, and I'm so happy that we can be a part of that. I'm so happy that so many people are picking up the torch and carrying that banner themselves too. We're now seeing all these new additional actual play streams of people from all over the world and all different walks of life, and it's just about wanting to tell their story. And if one person watches, if 10 people watch, that's the world. I would never have imagined in a million years that this hobby that meant so much to me growing up would have the growth and the impact that it has. This game means so much to me, and it's for so many years it was something that I wasn't sure I could talk about, or I had to be very particular and careful about the spaces publicly that I could engage in the conversation. When I found somebody who even knew what I was talking about, let alone was excited about it, it was a memorable encounter, So like now the fact that not only is it more acceptable, but it's actually becoming a draw for people that are coming out of the woodwork and going, I've always been interested about this D&D thing. How's it work? Or like, man, you guys look having so much fun. Maybe I'll give it a shot. That's mind blowing to me, from a kid who grew up in the 90s when this stuff was considered evil or just basement, don't touch me nerdy. And I'm so excited. I'm so excited, and I'm so proud that through this process we also have a lot of people that are learning what it means to be a good person and to be inclusive and to let other people tell their tales, no matter how different or similar it may be to yours. And we all learn that from each other. So, I mean, I could go on a whole tangent about this, the philosophy and the psychology of role-playing games and the positive impact it has, but I don't need to, because we're seeing it now. We're seeing it very publicly, and that's incredible.
Well, if you come back, we will definitely get into it a little bit more. But I think for now, we'll leave it there. Where can people find you, Matthew, on the internet if they want to see what you're up to?
You can find me on the social media via Twitter at Matthew Mercer or Instagram at Matthew Mercer VO. And you can watch us stream our D&D game for the most part weekly on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Pacific time on Geek and Sundry's Twitch, twitch.tv/Geek and Sundry or twitch.tv/Critical Role.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it.
Dude, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, man.
That was a great interview with Matthew Mercer. What a really sweet individual and a really, really nice person. So, Matthew, thank you for coming on. Excited to see what comes next out of his brilliant brain. And people, if you enjoy Tabletop Babble, if you like Tabletop Babble, you should come rate the show on iTunes. Why? It helps other people find the show. Even if you're using a different podcatcher app, odds are your podcatcher app uses iTunes algorithms to recommend podcasts to other people. So head on over there, make a free iTunes account, and give us a good old rating. Let us know how we're doing. And if you leave us a 5-star review, I will read your review out loud and credit the person who left it. You can make me say anything you want, like Berman, who left a review called Everything Good About D&D. And Berman says, James is an excellent host that engages his guests with ease. Said guests are everything from big names in the industry to folks working hard on projects that help others and grow the community. Scroll through the catalog and you will find an episode that catches your interest. Listen to that one and you'll be hooked. Well, Berman, thank you so much for this review. This is super, super kind. And reviews like this and this sort of attitude are also everything good about D&D and the D&D community. So thank you very much for leaving us a 5-star review. People, if you haven't heard, we have a new podcast on the network. It's called Total Party Thrill. You're going to want to check it out because if you like Tabletop Babble, you're going to love Total Party Thrill. Total Party Thrill is a show where Shane and Ishan, who are two just brilliant gamers, sit down and talk about the game. They give everything from GM advice to player advice. They talk about all sorts of different role-playing games. It is super duper accessible and it is super duper funny. So check it out. It's called Total Party Thrill. They've been around for a while, but they just joined our network. They also, if you're interested, just released a review of Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition written by a friend of the show, Kenneth Haidt. So go check that out. It is a really, really good, thorough review that they do, and you're really going to like Total Party Thrill. And if you want to meet Shane and Ishan, in addition to myself, Rudy Basso, the Venture Maidens, the Dames and Dragons, and Mike Shea of the DM's Deep Dive, and you're headed to Gen Con, you are going to want to check out our panel on Saturday. It is at 5 p.m. in Lucas Oil Stadium. Head on over to the Gen Con event site and just search for Don't Split the Podcast. It's the only network that comes up. We're going to be giving away prizes, and there is an after party afterwards that you can attend. But we're giving out the location there at the panel. So you got to go to the panel to get the location of the after party. So go check it out. It is going to be a lot of fun. And by after party, I mean we're all going to a bar and having some drinks and stuff. There's not like a private room or anything like that. I just want to set expectations. But it's going to be fun. We did it last year. It was super, super fun. So go check it out. And I hope that I can meet you at Gen Con if you're headed to Gen Con. If not, I'm headed to lots and lots of other cons. Or you can always hit me up on Twitter at James Introcaso. Or you can check out all of the game design stuff I'm doing over at worldbuilderblog.com. Which there's going to be a really big announcement. I'm not done yet announcing things that have happened so far in my life. I'm glad to be able to finally talk about a lot of them. So go check it out. It is super, super fun. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. It's not a good idea to do it in the middle of a highway.
Hey there, listeners. It's Shane.
And Ishan, your hosts from the Total Party Thrill podcast, the newest addition to the Don't Split the Podcast Network.
We talk topics that help you, dear listener, create and play better RPG games.
We have a back catalog of more than 150 weekly episodes.
And we got nominated for an Emmy for episode 11, Social Contracts.
In episode 154, we talked about crossing the moral event horizon. How evil is too evil?
We also recap our home games, like the 40k Rogue Trader campaign, Dynasty Unwarranted.
But that's mainly just you trying to kill us all. In your defense, our characters are greedy idiots.
Don't forget the 3 years we spent in Eberron playing Morning Glory, your 5th edition D&D campaign.
We also review new RPGs and books, and every episode we build a 5th edition D&D character in the Character Creation Forge.
You might check out the Pint-Sized Punisher from episode 119, a halfling with a bad attitude, and 14 levels of Barbarian.
So to recap, Total Party Thrill, RPG advice, campaign recaps, and D&D characters built by your dashing hosts every single week.
What more could you possibly want?
To get back to the actual show?
Oh yeah, let me just hit this button, and here you go.